Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. For 1,000 years, one name echoed across the known world, a symbol of unparalleled power, engineering marvels, and brutal conquest: Rome. From a humble city-state on the banks of the Tiber, it grew into a colossal empire that stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Mesopotamia. Its legions were invincible, its laws became the foundation of Western civilization, and its architectural genius still stands in silent testament to its glory. But like all great powers, its ascent was matched only by the drama of its decline. How did a republic built on ideals of liberty transform into an empire ruled by autocrats? What were the seeds of its own destruction, sown even at the height of its power? Join us as we journey through the epic saga of ambition, betrayal, and destiny. The story of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Every great power has a founding myth, a story whispered through generations to explain its divine origins and destiny. For Rome, that story begins not in a palace, but on the muddy banks of a river, with 2 abandoned infants and a she-wolf. The legend of Romulus and Remus is a tale steeped in prophecy, betrayal, and blood. It begins with Numitor, the rightful king of Alba Longa, who was overthrown by his cruel brother, Amulius. To secure his throne, Amulius forced Numitor's daughter, Rhea Silvia, to become a Vestal virgin, sworn to celibacy. But the gods had other plans. The war god, Mars, visited Rhea Silvia, and from their union, twin boys were born, Romulus and Remus. Furious, Amulius ordered the infants to be cast into the Tiber River, a death sentence for any child. Yet, the river itself seemed to protect them, carrying their basket to the shore at the foot of the Palatine Hill. Here, the story takes its most iconic turn. They were discovered by a she-wolf, a creature that should have been a predator, but instead became their protector, nursing the divine children as her own. This powerful image of nature, nurturing the founders of a future empire, became a symbol of Rome's own fierce, resilient, and almost feral beginnings. Raised by a humble shepherd named Faustulus and his wife, the boys grew into natural leaders, strong and charismatic. Upon learning their true heritage, they returned to Alba Longa, killed the usurper Amulius, and restored their grandfather Numitor to the throne. But their own ambition could not be contained in an old city. They resolved to found their own city near the place of their salvation. Here, the brothers' bond fractured. They quarreled over which hill to build upon and who should rule. An augury, a reading of bird omens, favored Romulus. In a fit of jealous rage, Remus mocked the low walls of Romulus's fledgling settlement, leaping over them. For this act of defiance, Romulus struck him down, declaring, "So shall it be for all who dare to cross my walls." On the blood of his own brother, Rome was founded. This act of fratricide at the very heart of Rome's origin story is a chilling prophecy of the city's future. A future where power would be seized through violence and family ties would be severed by ambition. A world Agrippina the Younger would come to know all too well. The city founded on fratricide was first ruled by kings. For over 2 centuries, 7 legendary kings, starting with Romulus, shaped its early laws and society. But the rule of the final king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, was a reign of tyranny that soured the Roman people on the very idea of monarchy. His overthrow in 509 BCE was not merely a coup, it was a revolution in political thought. In its place, the Romans created something new, something they called res publica, a public affair. This was the birth of the Roman Republic. However, this new republic was far from a democracy for all. Power was concentrated in the hands of the patricians, the aristocratic elite who traced their lineage to the city's first senators. The vast majority of the populace, the plebeians, common farmers, artisans, and merchants, had duties to the state, including military service, but few real rights. They could not hold high office, could not marry into patrician families, and were subject to harsh debt laws that could lead to enslavement. This fundamental inequality set the stage for a prolonged and bitter social conflict known as the struggle of the orders. The plebeians' greatest weapon was their necessity. They were the backbone of the Roman army. In 494 BCE, they deployed this weapon in a stunning act of civil disobedience. Feeling exploited and unrepresented, the entire plebeian population seceded from Rome, marching out of the city and occupying the nearby Sacred Mount. They refused to work, fight, or participate in Roman life until their grievances were addressed. This first secessio plebis paralyzed the city. The patricians were forced to concede, leading to the creation of a powerful new office, the tribune of the plebs. These officials, elected by the plebeians, had the extraordinary power of the veto, allowing them to block any act of a magistrate or the Senate that harmed the common people. This was only the beginning. The struggle continued for decades, leading to the publication of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written legal code, ensuring laws were applied equally to all. This long, arduous fight for rights and representation forged the political DNA of Rome, creating a complex system of checks and balances. It was a system Agrippina the Younger would later be forced to navigate, manipulate, and ultimately witness the destruction of. As the Roman Republic solidified its control over the Italian peninsula, its gaze turned outward across the shimmering Mediterranean Sea. There, on the coast of North Africa, lay its great rival, the mighty maritime empire of Carthage. Founded by Phoenician traders centuries earlier, Carthage was a commercial powerhouse, its vast navy dominating the trade routes of the Western Mediterranean. For a long time, the two powers coexisted, but as Rome's ambition grew, a collision became inevitable. The flashpoint was the island of Sicily, a strategic and fertile landmass coveted by both. This dispute ignited the First Punic War in 264 BCE, a conflict that would rage for over 2 decades. Initially, the war was a stalemate. Carthage's naval supremacy gave it a clear advantage at sea, while Rome's disciplined legions dominated on land. The Romans, however, were masters of adaptation. Realizing they could never win without challenging Carthage on the water, they undertook a monumental feat. They built a navy from scratch. According to legend, they reverse-engineered a captured Carthaginian quinquereme, building a fleet of over 100 ships in a matter of months. To compensate for their inexperience in naval tactics, they equipped their ships with an ingenious innovation, the corvus, a large movable bridge with a heavy spike. It allowed them to grapple onto enemy vessels, transforming a sea battle into a land battle on deck, where their superior soldiers could overwhelm the Carthaginian crews. The war was a brutal, grinding affair, costing both sides hundreds of thousands of lives and hundreds of ships. In the end, Rome's relentless determination won out. A defeated Carthage was forced to cede Sicily and pay a massive indemnity. But this was not the end. It was merely the end of the first act. In Carthage, a deep-seated resentment festered, personified by the brilliant general Hamilcar Barca. He reportedly made his young son Hannibal swear a sacred oath upon an altar to forever be an enemy of Rome. This vow of vengeance would set the stage for a second, even more devastating war, one that would push Rome to the brink of annihilation and forge the global empire that Agrippina's family would one day inherit. The peace between Rome and Carthage was nothing more than a cold truce. In Spain, Hamilcar Barca's son, Hannibal, forged a disciplined army and prepared to fulfill his sacred oath. In 218 BCE, he unleashed the Second Punic War, with an act of military audacity that is still studied today. Instead of a predictable sea invasion, Hannibal chose the impossible. He would march his army, including dozens of war elephants, from Spain, across the Pyrenees, and through the treacherous, snow-capped Alps to strike at Rome in its own heartland, Italy. The journey was catastrophic. Thousands of his men and most of his elephants perished in the freezing mountain passes. But the men who emerged onto the plains of northern Italy were a hardened, fanatical force, loyal to their brilliant commander. What followed was a string of military disasters for the Roman Republic, unlike any it had ever faced. At the Battle of the Trebia, Hannibal used the cold and terrain to his advantage, crushing a consular army. At Lake Trasimene, he laid a perfect ambush, trapping and annihilating another Roman force in a narrow defile. The Roman Senate and people were gripped by panic. In response, they appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, who employed a novel and unpopular strategy of harassment and avoidance, shadowing Hannibal's army but refusing a pitched battle. This earned him the nickname Cunctator, the delayer. But the Romans grew impatient with these tactics. In 216 BCE, they assembled the largest army in their history, some 80,000 strong, and met Hannibal on the plains of Cannae. The result was the Republic's darkest day. Through tactical genius, Hannibal executed a perfect double envelopment, surrounding and slaughtering the larger Roman force. By nightfall, as many as 70,000 Romans lay dead on the field. The news sent shockwaves through the Mediterranean. The phrase, Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal at the gates, became a terrifying reality. For over a decade, Hannibal rampaged through Italy, seemingly invincible. Yet, Rome refused to break. It endured, raising new armies, holding firm, and eventually producing a general, Scipio Africanus, who was Hannibal's equal. This trial by fire forged a generation of Romans, instilling a resilience and ruthless pragmatism that would define their empire, an empire whose ultimate power would later be contested not by foreign generals, but from within its own imperial family, by figures like Agrippina. Following the titanic struggle with Carthage in the Punic Wars, Rome emerged not just as a regional power, but as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. The destruction of its great rival in 146 BC was a point of no return. The sea, once a barrier and a battleground, was becoming a Roman lake. They called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. This was not mere arrogance, it was a statement of fact. Roman legions, now seasoned veterans of unimaginable conflicts, turned their standards east. The Hellenistic kingdoms of Greece and Asia Minor, heirs to Alexander the Great's fractured empire, were rich, cultured, but politically divided and militarily weak compared to the Roman war machine. One by one, they were humbled. Macedonia, the homeland of Alexander, was annexed. The Greek city-states were brought to heel, their legendary independence extinguished. The vast wealth of the East began to flow into Rome in a torrent of gold, silver, art, and slaves. This influx of capital fundamentally and irrevocably transformed Roman society. The small agrarian republic was vanishing. Enormous slave-run estates, the latifundia, consolidated land, pushing the citizen farmer off his ancestral plot and into the city of Rome, creating a volatile, landless, urban proletariat. The traditional Roman virtues of discipline and austerity began to erode, replaced by a lust for luxury and power. The generals who won these new territories, men like Scipio Aemilianus and Lucius Aemilius Paulus, returned as heroes with immense personal wealth and influence, commanding the loyalty of their legions. The Senate, once the unquestioned arbiter of the state, now had to contend with individuals whose power rivaled its own. The conquest of the Mediterranean made Rome an empire in all but name, but it also sowed the seeds of the Republic's own destruction. The very expansion that brought unparalleled glory created deep, systemic inequalities and concentrated power in the hands of ambitious men, setting a dangerous precedent for the generations to come. Into this cauldron of social and economic turmoil stepped two brothers from one of Rome's most distinguished families, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Their mother, Cornelia, was the daughter of the great Scipio Africanus, the victor over Hannibal. Yet, despite their aristocratic lineage, the Gracchi saw the crisis brewing at the heart of the Republic. Tiberius, elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BC, was appalled by the plight of the dispossessed citizen farmers who formed the backbone of the Roman army. He proposed a simple yet revolutionary solution: enforce an ancient law limiting the amount of public land a single individual could own and redistribute the excess to the landless poor. The senatorial elite, whose wealth was largely built on these vast estates, saw this not as reform, but as an existential threat. They used their political muscle to block his legislation. In an unprecedented move, Tiberius had a rival tribune deposed and passed his law directly through the plebeian assembly, bypassing the Senate entirely. This act shattered centuries of political tradition. When he sought re-election, a move of questionable legality, his opponents claimed he was aiming for tyranny. A mob of senators and their clients, in a shocking eruption of political violence, clubbed Tiberius and 300 of his followers to death in the streets of Rome. A decade later, his younger brother Gaius took up the cause with an even more ambitious and wide-ranging reform program. He sought to stabilize grain prices, build roads, establish new colonies, and, most controversially, extend Roman citizenship to the Italian allies. Once again, the Senate moved against him. Faced with certain death, Gaius committed suicide in 121 BC, and thousands of his supporters were subsequently executed. The story of the Gracchi was a tragic turning point. It demonstrated that the traditional political mechanisms of the Republic were broken. Reform could no longer be achieved through debate. Violence had become a political tool. The blood of the Gracchi stained the Forum, signaling the beginning of a century of civil unrest and war. The failure of the Gracchi's reforms left the Republic's problems to fester. The most pressing of these was a military manpower crisis. With fewer land-owning citizens eligible for service, Rome struggled to field armies. The man who solved this problem, Gaius Marius, would inadvertently create a much larger one. a new man from a non-aristocratic family. Marius was a brilliant general. To fight wars in North Africa and against Germanic tribes, he enacted the Marian reforms. He abolished the property requirement for military service, opening the legions to the landless urban poor. He promised them land and a pension upon retirement, paid for not by the state, but by their commanding general. In a single stroke, he created a professional, long-serving army. However, this army's loyalty was no longer to the Senate and people of Rome, but to the general who paid them and guaranteed their future. The Roman soldier was now a client, and his general a patron. This new dynamic came to a head in the rivalry between Marius and his ambitious patrician subordinate, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. When the command of a lucrative war in the east was given to Sulla, Marius's political allies had it transferred back to him. Sulla's response was unthinkable. He did what no Roman commander had ever done before. He marched his legions on the city of Rome itself. The sanctity of the city was violated, and the Republic crossed a terrifying threshold. Sulla took the city by force, declared his enemies outlaws, and departed for the east. In his absence, Marius returned, unleashing a bloody purge of Sulla's supporters. When Sulla finally returned victorious from his campaigns, he initiated a civil war that devastated Italy. He emerged as the ultimate victor, and to restore order, had himself declared dictator for the reconstitution of the Republic. He unleashed the proscriptions, a legalized murder list where the state posted the names of his enemies, offering rewards for their deaths and confiscating their property. Thousands were killed. Sulla eventually retired, but the damage was done. He had shown that a loyal army could make a man the master of Rome, a lesson that would not be forgotten. While Roman generals turned their swords on each other, the Republic was shaken from below by the largest slave revolt in its history. In 73 BC, from a gladiator school in Capua, a Thracian named Spartacus led a breakout of around 70 fellow fighters. What began as a desperate bid for freedom quickly spiraled into a full-blown war that brought the Italian peninsula to its knees. This was not the first slave uprising Rome had faced, but it was by far the most dangerous. Spartacus proved to be a military genius, a charismatic leader capable of molding a desperate rabble of escaped slaves, shepherds, and rural poor into a disciplined and effective fighting force. His army swelled to an estimated 70,000 to 120,000 men, women, and children. For 2 years, they rampaged across Italy, defying the power of Rome. They were not just a mob, they were an army. They defeated 2 Praetorian forces, then 2 consular armies, the main military forces of the Republic, in succession. The sheer humiliation was immense. The Roman elite, who viewed slaves as little more than property or talking tools, were gripped by terror. The war exposed the fragility of a society built on the brutal subjugation of millions. Spartacus's ultimate goal remains a subject of debate. Whether he intended to plunder Rome, escape Italy over the Alps, or forge a new kingdom is unknown. What is clear is that he repeatedly outmaneuvered and outfought the legions sent against him. Panicked, the Senate finally turned to Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, granting him extraordinary powers to crush the rebellion. Crassus, hungry for military glory, cornered Spartacus's army in the south of Italy. After a final desperate battle, the slave army was annihilated. Spartacus himself died in the fighting, his body never identified. Crassus, to make an example, crucified 6,000 captured survivors along the Appian Way, the main road leading to Rome. The grisly spectacle served as a brutal warning. But the legend of the gladiator who made Rome tremble would endure for millennia. To comprehend the world that forged Agrippina the Younger, we must first turn back the clock to a generation before her birth, to a moment that shattered a 500-year-old republic. The year is 49 BCE. On the banks of a small river in northern Italy, the Rubicon, Gaius Julius Caesar, a brilliant general and populist politician, faced a monumental choice. For years, he had been campaigning in Gaul, expanding Rome's territories and amassing immense wealth, loyalty, and military power. Back in Rome, his political rivals, led by his former ally Pompey the Great, grew fearful of his ambition. The Senate, dominated by a conservative aristocratic faction, saw him as a threat to their authority and the traditional order. They issued an ultimatum: disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen to face prosecution for alleged illegalities during his consulship. For Caesar, this was a death sentence, both politically and perhaps literally. His command, his imperium, gave him legal immunity. To give it up was to place himself at the mercy of his enemies. Standing with his famed 13th Legion, he knew that crossing the Rubicon under arms was an act of treason, an undeniable declaration of civil war. The phrase he is said to have uttered, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast, has echoed through history as the ultimate expression of passing a point of no return. This single act was the catalyst that would demolish the foundations of the Roman Republic. It set in motion a chain of events that would lead to years of bloody conflict, the end of senatorial rule, and the birth of a new political reality: autocracy. Caesar's ambition was not just for personal glory. It was a fundamental challenge to the existing power structure. By choosing war over submission, he created the precedent for a single man to wield absolute authority over Rome, backed by the might of the legions. This was the seismic shift that created the very concept of an emperor, the world into which Agrippina would be born, a world where lineage, power, and military backing meant everything, and the old laws meant nothing. Caesar's gamble paid off. Pompey and his senatorial allies were driven from Italy and ultimately defeated. By 44 BCE, Caesar was the undisputed master of Rome. He was declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life, and showered with honors that blurred the line between man and God. He reformed the calendar, initiated massive public works projects, and settled his veterans on lands throughout the provinces. To many, he was a hero who had ended the chaos of perpetual civil strife. But to the old guard of the Senate, he was a tyrant who had crushed Roman liberty. A conspiracy began to form, a desperate alliance of former enemies and disgruntled friends, all united by a single goal: to restore the Republic by eliminating its oppressor. They called themselves the Liberators. Led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, they believed that killing one man could turn back the tide of history. The chosen day was the Ides of March, the 15th of the month. As Caesar entered a meeting of the Senate held at the Theater of Pompey, the conspirators surrounded him. According to the ancient historians, they fell upon him with daggers hidden in their togas, stabbing him 23 times. He died at the foot of a statue of his great rival Pompey, his blood staining the Senate floor. The assassins had acted, but their dream of a restored republic died with Caesar. Instead of being hailed as heroes, they unleashed a new wave of chaos and a vicious power struggle. The populace, who had adored Caesar, was enraged. His loyal lieutenant, Mark Antony, and his young, cunning great-nephew and adopted heir, Octavian, quickly moved to fill the void. The assassination did not save the Republic. It merely guaranteed its demise. It taught a brutal lesson that would define the Julio-Claudian dynasty, that supreme power was a precarious position, and the greatest threat often came not from foreign enemies, but from the daggers of supposed friends. In the heart of Rome, this was the bloody inheritance of Agrippina's family, a constant reminder that power invited paranoia, and paranoia invited preemptive violence. Out of the blood-soaked chaos following Caesar's murder, two dominant figures emerged: Mark Antony, the seasoned general, and Octavian, the teenage heir. What followed was another decade of brutal civil war, a conflict that pitted Roman against Roman across the Mediterranean. Initially allies in their quest to hunt down Caesar's assassins, their alliance soon fractured under the weight of their own ambitions. The final confrontation came in 31 BCE at the naval battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general Marcus Agrippa, crushed the combined forces of Antony and his lover, the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. Their subsequent suicides left Octavian, still just in his early 30s, as the sole, unchallenged ruler of the Roman world. But he had learned from his great-uncle's fate. He knew that Romans, particularly the aristocracy, still harbored a deep-seated hatred for the title of king. A blatant monarchy was unacceptable. So, Octavian engineered a political masterpiece. In 27 BCE, he made a great show of returning power to the Senate and the Roman people, declaring the Republic restored. In gratitude, the Senate bestowed upon him the new honorific title, Augustus, the revered or illustrious one. They also granted him a suite of powers that, while maintaining the facade of republican institutions, gave him absolute control over the military, the finances, and the provinces. He was not a king or a dictator. He was the princeps, the first citizen. This was the birth of the Roman Empire. Augustus ushered in an era of stability and prosperity, but he also cemented the system of one-man rule. He established the Praetorian Guard as the emperor's personal bodyguard in Rome, a force that would become a powerful and often dangerous political player. More importantly for our story, he made the imperial family the center of the state. Succession was not a law, but a deeply personal and often deadly family affair. Augustus was Agrippina, the younger's great-grandfather. He created the very system she would be born into, a gilded cage where blood ties conferred immense privilege, but also mortal danger. With Augustus firmly in control, the endless cycle of civil wars that had plagued Rome for a century finally came to an end. This marked the beginning of a remarkable period known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For roughly 200 years, from the reign of Augustus until the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, the Mediterranean world experienced unprecedented stability, security, and prosperity. Roman legions, no longer fighting each other, were stationed at the frontiers, guarding the vast empire from external threats. Within these borders, trade flourished. A complex network of roads, marvels of engineering, connected provinces from Britain to Syria, allowing for the rapid movement of goods, armies, and ideas. A common currency and a unified legal system made commerce easier and more predictable than ever before. Cities across the empire grew in size and splendor, adorned with magnificent public buildings like aqueducts, forums, temples, and amphitheaters, all funded by the immense wealth flowing into Rome. Art, literature, and architecture reached new heights. Writers like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid produced timeless classics under the patronage of the emperor. This was the public face of the empire, a golden age of order and civilization. However, this grand narrative of peace often concealed a darker reality, especially within the marble halls of the imperial palace. While the provinces were largely at peace, the court of the Julio-Claudians was a hotbed of intrigue, conspiracy, and paranoia. The question of succession, which Augustus never formally solved, created constant tension. Ambitious family members vied for influence, and potential rivals were eliminated through exile or poison. The Pax Romana was a peace for the empire, but not always for the emperor's family. Agrippina the Younger was a product of this duality. She grew up enjoying the immense wealth and privilege of the era, yet she lived her entire life within this treacherous inner circle, where a whisper could be a death sentence and the struggle for power was a constant, silent war. To understand Agrippina the Younger, one must first understand the crucible that forged her, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. It was a lineage born from the ashes of a republic, a family that redefined power, glory, and paranoia for the Roman world. It began with the political genius of Augustus, who cloaked a monarchy in the traditions of the old republic, creating a system dependent not on institutions, but on the blood running through a single family's veins. This was the inheritance Agrippina was born into, a world where lineage was both a shield and a target. The dynasty was a gallery of contradictions. Under its rule, the empire expanded, law was codified, and magnificent structures rose to touch the heavens. Yet, within the palace walls, a different story unfolded. Tiberius, Augustus's successor, ruled from a self-imposed exile on Capri, his reign marred by treason trials and a suffocating atmosphere of fear that Agrippina would have witnessed as a child. Then came her brother Caligula, whose brief reign descended into a fever dream of absurdity and terror, a stark lesson in how absolute power could corrupt absolutely. It was Caligula who exiled Agrippina, planting the seeds of her resilience and cunning. Following Caligula's assassination, her uncle Claudius ascended, a man often underestimated, whose reign was a complex mix of competent administration and vulnerability to manipulation, particularly by his wives. It was this environment of extremes, of brilliant governance and grotesque personal failings, of public works and private poisonings, that shaped Agrippina's worldview. She learned that survival depended on ruthlessness, that influence was wielded in whispers and alliances, and that the ultimate prize, the imperial throne, was worth any cost. The Julio-Claudians were not merely rulers, they were a saga of ambition, incest, betrayal, and murder, played out on the world's grandest stage. Agrippina was not just a character in this drama. She was its ultimate student, and she was determined to write its final, bloody chapter. The death of Nero, the son Agrippina had placed on the throne, and who had ultimately ordered her own murder, did not bring peace. Instead, it ripped the fragile fabric of the Julio-Claudian dynasty apart, plunging Rome into a year of bloody chaos. The year 69 AD, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, was the violent, inevitable consequence of a system built on a single bloodline. With Nero's suicide, that bloodline was extinguished, and a power vacuum opened, pulling the entire empire into its vortex. The succession was no longer a matter for the Senate or the palace. It was now decided by the legions. The very soldiers Agrippina had once courted to secure her son's power were now the arbiters of Rome's fate. First came Galba, a stern governor from Spain whose austerity and refusal to pay the Praetorian Guard their expected donative sealed his doom. He was murdered in the Forum, the heart of the city. Then came Otho, a former friend of Nero, who bought the Guard's loyalty but could not win the allegiance of the powerful Rhine legions. They proclaimed their own commander, Vitellius, as emperor. The resulting civil war was brutal, with Roman fighting Roman in the fields of Italy. Otho, defeated at the Battle of Bedriacum, chose suicide over prolonging the conflict. Vitellius then entered Rome, not as a savior, but as a conqueror, his brief reign marked by gluttony and excess. But even as he feasted, the Eastern legions had made their choice: the pragmatic and experienced general, Vespasian. The final clash came on the streets of Rome itself, a horrific urban battle that saw the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the most sacred site in the city, burned to the ground. The dream of Augustus had become a nightmare. This year of turmoil was Agrippina's posthumous legacy. Her relentless ambition had secured the throne for a son who proved to be the dynasty's end, demonstrating that a system so dependent on personal power and military loyalty, rather than stable institutions, was destined to collapse into anarchy. Out of the ashes of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and the civil war that followed, a new model of leadership emerged, one that stood in stark opposition to everything Agrippina had fought and died for. The era of the 5 good emperors, spanning from 96 to 180 AD, is often hailed as the zenith of the Roman Empire, a golden age of peace, prosperity, and stability. This period was defined by a revolutionary concept of succession: adoption. Instead of the throne passing through the treacherous currents of bloodlines and birthright, which had fueled the paranoia and murder of Agrippina's time, emperors now chose their successors based on merit and ability. It began with the elderly Nerva adopting the formidable General Trajan. This single act broke the cycle of hereditary rule. Trajan, in turn, adopted Hadrian, who consolidated the empire's borders. Hadrian chose Antoninus Pius, a man renowned for his piety and peaceful reign, who then adopted the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. This chain of meritocratic succession created nearly a century of competent and stable governance. The contrast with the world Agrippina knew could not be more profound. Her life was consumed by the desperate need to position her son, Nero, as the heir, a struggle that involved political maneuvering, strategic marriages, and ultimately murder. For her, power was a birthright to be seized. For the 5 good emperors, it was a duty to be earned and a trust to be passed to the most capable hands. Under their rule, the empire flourished. Great public works like Trajan's Market and Hadrian's Wall were constructed. Laws were applied more humanely, and the provinces enjoyed unprecedented prosperity. The frantic, inward-looking court intrigue that had defined the Julio-Claudians was replaced by an outward-looking administration focused on the welfare of a vast and diverse empire. This era serves as a powerful commentary on Agrippina's legacy, highlighting that the stability she craved for her son could only be achieved by abandoning the very dynastic principles she championed. The golden age of the 5 good emperors, however, proved to be a fragile piece. The stability they had carefully constructed eventually shattered, giving way to a period of near-total collapse known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. This 50-year period, from 235 to 284 AD, saw the Roman Empire teeter on the very brink of dissolution, plagued by constant civil war, foreign invasion, economic depression, and pandemic. In many ways, this crisis was the horrifying delayed fruition of the seeds planted in Agrippina's time. The precedent of military intervention in politics, which exploded during the year of the 4 emperors following Nero's death, became the defining feature of this new, terrifying era. The legions, once defenders of the frontier, were now the primary emperor-makers. A general's success on the battlefield was no longer a service to the state, but a potential claim to the throne. Dozens of so-called Barracks Emperors rose and fell, most meeting violent ends after reigns lasting only a few months or years. The Praetorian Guard, whose loyalty Agrippina had so skillfully manipulated to install Nero, had become a corrupt and self-serving institution that would assassinate emperors at will. The very tools of power that Agrippina had wielded, military loyalty, political assassination, and the prioritization of personal power over institutional stability, were now tearing the empire apart on a scale she could never have imagined. The frontiers crumbled as armies were pulled inward to fight yet another civil war. The currency was debased to pay troops, leading to hyperinflation that crippled the economy. Barbarian tribes like the Goths and Alemanni poured across the Rhine and Danube, while the Sasanian Empire pressed from the east. For a time, the empire even split into 3 competing states. This was the ultimate, chaotic endpoint of the system Augustus had created, and the Julio-Claudians had embodied. A state where military might superseded law, and where the path to power, paved by figures like Agrippina, was through violence and betrayal. 2 centuries after Agrippina the Younger's death, the empire she had schemed to control for her son was on the brink of total collapse. The system she knew, a precarious balance of one-man rule propped up by the Senate and the Praetorian Guard, had utterly disintegrated during the crisis of the 3rd century. For 50 years, Rome was a revolving door of so-called Barracks Emperors, generals raised on the shields of their legions, only to be cut down months or years later. The currency was worthless, plagues ravaged the populace, and barbarian tribes breached the frontiers with alarming regularity. The glorious, unified empire that Agrippina had envisioned under Nero's dominion was a fractured, bleeding shell of its former self. From this chaos rose a man of iron will and ruthless pragmatism, Diocletian. A soldier from humble origins, he understood that the empire was too vast, its problems too numerous, to be governed by a single man in a single capital. The old way was dead. In 293 AD, he instituted a radical reform, the Tetrarchy, or the Rule of 4. He divided the empire into an eastern and western half, each ruled by a senior emperor, an Augustus, and a junior emperor, a Caesar. This was not a division of sovereignty, but of administration, a bureaucratic solution to a military crisis. It was a system designed to ensure orderly succession and provide a commander on every threatened frontier. The intricate court intrigues of Agrippina's time seemed almost petty compared to this sweeping, impersonal reorganization of the Roman world. But Diocletian's reforms came with a dark side. To restore unity and divine favor, he demanded absolute conformity. He saw the growing Christian faith with its refusal to sacrifice to the Roman gods and the emperor, as a direct threat to the state's spiritual foundation. In 303 AD, he unleashed the Great Persecution, the most systematic and brutal attempt to eradicate Christianity in the empire's history. Churches were burned, scriptures were confiscated, and believers were forced to recant or face torture and death. It was a chilling echo of the tyranny Agrippina's own son, Nero, was accused of, but executed with the cold efficiency of a bureaucratic state rather than the whim of a volatile autocrat. Diocletian's iron fist had stabilized the empire, but at the cost of its old freedoms and by declaring war on a faith that would soon define its future. Diocletian's carefully constructed tetrarchy, a machine built to eliminate civil war, barely survived its creator. Upon his abdication, the system collapsed into a new round of bloody conflicts as ambitious men vied for supreme power. Out of this crucible of war emerged a figure who would fundamentally alter the destiny of the Roman world: Constantine. The son of a Caesar, Constantine fought his way to the top, culminating in the legendary Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD. On the eve of the battle, as the story goes, he looked to the sky and saw a vision, a cross of light, and with it, the words, "In hoc signo vinces." In this sign, you will conquer. He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, on their shields. They were victorious. This moment marked the beginning of a profound revolution. While Constantine did not make Christianity the state religion overnight, his victory ended the Great Persecution. The Edict of Milan in 313 AD granted tolerance to all religions, but it was clear which faith now had the emperor's favor. The God of the Christians, once a persecuted minority, was now the patron of Roman power. This was a seismic shift away from the pagan traditions that had underpinned the Roman state since its inception. The very traditions Agrippina and the Julio-Claudians had embodied and manipulated. But Constantine's revolution was not just spiritual, it was geopolitical. He recognized that the ancient city of Rome, the stage for Agrippina's deadly political theater, was no longer the strategic heart of the empire. Power had shifted east, closer to the wealthy provinces and the critical Danubian and Persian frontiers. On the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, he founded a new capital, a new Rome. Inaugurated in 330 AD, it was named Constantinople. This city was built as a Christian capital, filled with churches instead of pagan temples. The power Agrippina had fought and died for in the palaces of the Palatine Hill was now being redefined, relocated, and rededicated to a new god, hundreds of miles away. The old Rome, the city of Caesar, Augustus, and Nero, was beginning its long, slow slide into provincial irrelevance. Constantine's new capital created a second center of gravity for the Roman world, accelerating a divergence that had been growing for centuries. While the empire was still theoretically a single entity, it was now managed from two distinct hubs: the old Rome in the west and the new Rome, Constantinople, in the east. After the death of Emperor Theodosius I in 395 AD, this administrative split became a permanent political reality. He bequeathed the empire to his two sons, with Arcadius ruling the east and Honorius ruling the west. From this point forward, the two halves of the empire would never again be truly united under a single ruler. The dream of a single, monolithic Roman state, the ultimate prize for which Agrippina had sacrificed everything, was officially over. The two Romes were not created equal. The East was more populous, more urbanized, and far wealthier. It controlled the prosperous trade routes to Asia and possessed a more stable, diversified economy. Its capital, Constantinople, was a fortress protected by formidable walls and a strategic location. The Eastern Roman Empire, which would later be known as the Byzantine Empire, had the resources and leadership to survive and even thrive. The West, by contrast, was in a state of terminal decline. Its economy was largely agrarian and increasingly fragile. Its cities were shrinking, and its treasury was depleted by the constant need to pay for a mercenary army. The Western court was plagued by weak, ineffectual emperors, often children, who were dominated by powerful barbarian generals. The cultural divide also widened. The East was Greek-speaking and steeped in Hellenistic traditions, while the West clung to its Latin heritage. They were drifting apart not just politically, but culturally and spiritually. The intricate power plays of the Julio-Claudian court, where Agrippina's influence could shape the fate of the entire known world, seemed like a distant memory. Now power was fractured and decentralized. An emperor in Ravenna, the new capital of the West, had little say over the affairs of his counterpart in Constantinople, and vice versa. The grand, unified stage on which Agrippina played her game had been irrevocably broken in two. The final act in the long drama of the Roman West was not a single cataclysmic event, but a slow, agonizing dissolution. The 5th century was a cascade of failures. The empire's borders, once impenetrable, became porous. Waves of Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals, Franks, poured across the frontiers, not always as invaders, but often as desperate refugees fleeing from the terrifying Huns sweeping out of the east. These groups were incorporated into the empire as federates, allies bound to fight for Rome. But their loyalty was always to their own chieftains first. The Roman army was no longer Roman. It was a patchwork of barbarian mercenaries whose leaders held the true power behind the throne. In 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. For the first time in 800 years, the city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths under their king, Alaric. The psychological blow was immense. While the city was no longer the political capital, it remained the eternal symbolic heart of the empire. Its violation signaled that the end was near. Decades later, the Vandals sacked it again, more brutally this time. The Western Empire was hollowing out from within. Crippling taxation crushed the peasantry. Political corruption was rampant, and the ruling class retreated to their fortified villas, abandoning the public sphere. The complex system of administration, trade, and law that had held the Mediterranean world together for centuries simply crumbled. The end, when it came, was almost an anticlimax. In 476 AD, the German chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustus. Odoacer did not bother to name a successor. He simply sent the imperial insignia to the emperor in Constantinople, signaling that the Western Empire was no more. In truth, he was merely acknowledging a reality that had existed for decades. The seeds of this collapse were sown centuries earlier. The absolute power Agrippina the Younger so desperately craved for her son created a system reliant on the character of a single individual. The political murders she perfected became standard procedure. The erosion of republican traditions in favor of autocratic whim, the reliance on military force, and the moral rot within the ruling family. These were the pathologies of the early empire. Agrippina's story was not an aberration. It was a foundational chapter in the long, slow decay that ultimately led to the ruins of the Forum and the end of an era.